Today we are very honored to have Lanu Kim coming to give a talk with us. She personally said that she would love to visit Taiwan, but because of the COVID and the border restrictions, she couldn't come. But then Lanu, she's my friend at the University of Washington. She is now an assistant professor at the Korea Advanced Institute of Science and Technology. She had her PhD at the University of Washington, and then she was a postdoctoral fellow and a data science scholar at Stanford University. Well, her research broadly contributes to the theoretical understanding of academic knowledge creation by mainly examining the impact of academic search engines, gender inequality in higher education, and the social structure of knowledge construction. And she utilizes new big data sources, and she does very innovative analytical strategies. And well, she is an expert in advanced statistical methods. Back at UW too, she's really good at it. And I'm very impressed by her diligence and her expertise. So today, I would like to invite her to come, and then her talk I think it's based on a new paper published in Research Policy, which is about gendered knowledge in fields and academic careers. Apart from that paper, if you want to talk with her more, she also studied pretty widely on health, public health, on marriage in Korea, and also some online, some communication technology work, and also she does something about in sociological science. Well, this is a very good good journal. She also published about how to make better measures on the inequality in scholarly citation. So today, without further ado, I would like to have Lanu to take over and give us this talk. Thank you.
Thank you so much for really generous introduction. I'm really honored. Let me just trying to figure out a little bit more the layout of this. Yeah, okay, it's better. So let me share the screen. Yeah, so yes. Yeah, it's my first time using WebEx, so I'm trying to get used to it. We practiced it in the morning, and then it works pretty well and very close to Zoom. So I am pretty confident and I know the UI well. But okay, so my name is Lanu Kim, as introduced, and then here is my email address and homepage if you are interested. And then I am I don't know. I might not need to really repeat it, but I'm currently working in the School of Humanities and Social Sciences in KAIST. It's a kind of very like science specialized school in South Korea. So I am very happy to come here to give a talk to sociology audience. It's really my honor to be here. Yeah. And then, it's the science department, and sometimes I need to interpret these like sociological languages to be easily understood for those science-based background students. And sometimes they don't like it, sometimes they don't get the sense of it. So it needs a little bit more interpretation from my language to their languages, even if we are communicating in Korean. But yeah, so maybe it's a different opportunity for me to talk about like this topic. Gendered knowledge in to sociology audience would be it would be really fun time for me. So thanks for inviting me, and then let me start. So it's a paper, it's my postdoc paper, which I wrote when I was working at Stanford as a postdoc scholar. And then I worked with wonderful collaborators at Stanford. And then I don't know why, but accidentally, they are all three white men. And then, however, they are not just these three white men, they were my wonderful colleagues. So the one on the left was Daniel Scott Smith, and then he's a PhD candidate at Stanford right now. Basso Hofstra, he was my fellow postdoc who always walks with me for a cup of coffee in the morning when we were there together. He's currently in Netherlands, and then this is Dan McFarland, who's a professor at Stanford in Graduate School of Education. So I just want to introduce my collaborators first. Yeah, and then let's talk about the project that I've been working on. So first of all, when I talk about gendered knowledge, first I want to make it clear what I really mean by saying knowledge. So when I say like scientific knowledge, of course, there's always the question that whether scientific knowledge is limited to knowledge in STEM field, or whether it covers like all knowledge that even includes humanities and social sciences. In this paper, I use science as more a broad sense of it. So I actually even looked for a dictionary and search science and what that means. And it actually has two meanings. So specifically, it includes only STEM fields. However, it can be used for more broad manners. So when we use it in a broad manner, what science means is that it's a kind of the systematic method, systematic behavior of studying the world. It's kind of the systematic investigation of the world we are living in, and then we call it science. So I use science in a more broad language. So when I say scientific knowledge, it's kind of the knowledge that has been produced in academia. And then as we as scholars always read and produce this scientific knowledge, and then we produce research results, and then and the research results can come out in multiple outlets, like in scientific, journal publications, or sometimes it's interpreted in news articles. Sometimes you can find it from patents, you can find it from the grant proposals. There are multiple sources of it. However, the one I'm going to focus on is the product that that the product is a PhD dissertation. So we write a dissertation to be a PhD. Then our knowledge, which we learned through our PhD process, is transferred to a set of text, which forms scientific knowledge. I've got a request to annotate the shared content. Should I approve it? Yeah, maybe, yeah. Oh, no, I think I shouldn't. Yeah, anyway, sorry, there was something going on in my WebEx. Yeah. Okay, so let's keep talking about it. So particularly, the reason why I chose a PhD dissertation as a way to study scientific knowledge is that a PhD dissertation is somewhat a statement of PhD's scholarly identity, who starts to enter the professional academic career. So it's kind of our statement as a scholar, as an independent scholar. It's kind of a starting point. So that was another reason why I studied this PhD dissertations, and I thought it's going to be a wonderful way to study academic career, because PhD dissertation is kind of, again, a statement independent scholar. So the thing I'm going to ask is that whether we have any impression of gender from these academic texts or those scientific knowledge. Is scientific knowledge gender neutral, or is scientific knowledge is not neutral, but rather it's gendered? So first of all, we might think that scientific knowledge is gender neutral. It's our very commonly way of thinking about scientific knowledge, because scientific knowledge is produced based on those rigorous procedures. We got peer reviews, and for dissertations, we always have a committee. They read it multiple times, and then we are somewhat emphasized to have the reproducibility of the research. So in an academic work, we always should provide details to a reader under the assumption that the research is always following the robust procedure. So if anyone follows the same protocols, they should arrive at the exactly same results. So that's kind of the virtue of doing the scientific research. It's what we learned. So maybe in that sense, we might think scientific knowledge is gender neutral and it shouldn't be doing anything with gender as itself. However, my question is that, is it true? On the other hand, there's a possibility that it might convey gender. So there can be a type of research considered like women type and men type. And then if it sounds too weird, just to think about like the consumer products we daily use. Like we all perceive a golf club is male type, and then while those like a baby gear is more considered a female type. And then do we have that kind of gender association with research too? That's my question I want to investigate, and then how that influences the researcher's career. By the way, feel free to interrupt if you have any questions. I'd love to answer if you have any. So if it's an important question to answer the question whether the scientific knowledge is gendered or not, because it matters in explaining gender inequality in academia. So one of the issues in academia is the pipeline problem, what we call a pipeline problem. And then a pipeline problem is that women are less represented in professorate than they should be based on the gender ratio in the grad school. So even if they start with the similar proportion in the beginning, however, as they go through the grad school, as they go through postdoctoral processes, when they arrive in the professorate, there are more men remain in academia than women. And then many explanations have been made why that happened. And then one reason is that there might be the sexism in academia, and there might be the bias toward those women and motherhood. And then also the unequal family burden has been one of the reasons. And then there is also the chilly climate theory as well, which means the lab environment or the academic environment among professorates might not be really friendly to those women scholars. And then that environmental setting is actually making those women dropped during this pipeline from grad school to the professorate. What has been relatively less discussed in the previous literature is the role of research products that PhDs produce on the academic career. So it has not been discussed extensively because there is an underlying assumption that research products are gender neutral and evaluated based on its own quality, based on its own merit. So we have a strong belief that those research products have a should be evaluated based on merits. But even if we believe they should be, it doesn't mean that it's actually working. So that's what we are going to examine. So what's going to happen if research products are not neutral, but actually gender embodied, or what if it's just a gender? And let's think about what's going to happen if it's gendered. So if women PhDs are more likely to choose like female typed research and men choose more male typed research, and at the same time, if woman typed research is devalued in academia while male typed research is valued, what's going to happen? It's going to intensify the academic gender inequality. It's going to worse the pipeline problem. So in other words, if our research finds the systematic evidence that woman-typed research is devalued, the previously considered quality or merit of research might be partly influenced by the bias toward women-typed research. So that's our kind of hypothesis. So our question is that does gendered scientific knowledge impact careers? Yeah. However, not however, but it's pretty common in the occupation research too, the devaluation of women's work. So for example, there's the very long debate that whether women, there are occupations that are more populated with women are less likely to be paid in comparison to those occupations that are more populated with males. And then there were two reasons, and there's the debate about it. And then the first hypothesis is that women are more likely to choose those less paying jobs because there's like the sexism, and they might think they are less competitive. They are somewhat educated to be less confident. So that might be the reason why women are less likely to choose. Women are more populated to less paying job. However, there's the opposite argument that actually when women begin to be populated in the area, that work is likely to be devalued in comparison to other occupations. So that's another like hypothesis. So it's not only happening, I mean, I'm not really making up this hypothesis from nothing, but there has been a pretty stable establishment that when women are more populated in certain work, that works are likely to be devalued than others. So that's kind of my problem setting. And then let's go into the detail how I'm gonna make it examined. So the data is doctoral students and their thesis. And then I got those data from the ProQuest database. So I'm not sure how Taiwan universities work. And actually, I don't know how Korean universities work too. Maybe now I need to find it out. But in the United States, where I was trained as a PhD and as a postdoc, we are required to submit our dissertation to the ProQuest, and if we do not submit it, the degree doesn't come out. So it's somewhat mandatory for us to submit there. So ProQuest database is kind of a near population of PhD recipients in the United States and also North American universities, which includes Canada as well, between 1980 to 2010. So it includes so far 1 million doctoral dissertation, which means there has been 1 million PhDs. I don't know where they are and then whether they are happy or whether they are doing well, but obviously there are near more than 1 million doctors from the US higher education system. Anyway, so it includes near 1 million doctoral dissertation abstracts and authors' basic information. And then we analyze this dissertation abstract as a conveyor of scientific knowledge. So let me just show you how it looks like. So I just searched my name because I don't want to make any of you embarrassed. I actually was thinking of searching Lake, but she might not like it, so I just used mine. Let's see what kind of data it includes. So it has the abstract of my PhD dissertation. Here is my name. Here is the school that I graduated. And then here is the year that I graduated. And there is the title of my dissertation. So my dissertation title and abstract already give me some information, like what kind of scholars I want to be. And I always submit it in my job application as kind of an identity statement to explain what kind of person I am. And then here's the subject, which shows me the discipline where I graduated. And then there's the somewhat standardized classification. However, it's relatively new. Our data didn't have it. So we had a hard time how to have the standardized classification. And also it has the identifier and keywords, and then it has number of pages, school code. So the school names are somewhat standardized. And then there's the country of publication, and the name of the advisor. And then I also have the committee member here, and the department, location, and then language, so on and so forth. So what you are seeing on this screen is the kind of variables that I could have from this data set. So that's why I really showed it in detail. And then also it has references and other information too, but I didn't really utilize it So let me show you how the descriptive statistics look like. So the data is from 1980 to 2010, and then you can see that those gray lines show this gray line shows the doctorate awarded population in the whole North America universities, and then you can see that it's slightly higher than our data set dissertations in ProQuest. However, you can see that the pattern is really similar and the gap is somewhat remained consistent. And considering that the number of total dissertations has been up, the proportion of our coverage has gotten better over time, which means, you know, more universities require their students to mandatorily submit their dissertations to ProQuest database. So the coverage rate has become better. And then I just want to emphasize that our data set looks very close to the population descriptive statistics. So it's a good data set. So that's the thing I want to argue for. So it's plus and minus 86 coverage throughout 1980 to 2010. However, we want to generalize the results, and then that is really rare in big data research, because when you think about like Twitter, and when you think about Facebook, when you think about Instagram, TikTok, if you get the data from these kind of social medias, actually it's very impossible, almost impossible to generalize to the whole population. However, we have a pretty well define the population here, and then we have pretty good sample from the data set. And then even to make it better, what we have done is that by combining the data from NSF, National Science Foundation, it's kind of an organization that governs all the PhD granting universities. So they have the population statistics, and then we combine it with ProQuest data, which is our data. So we try to give a right weight when we run the analysis. So we weight observations nicely, and then it was very, very challenging when we match it one by one, because the university name was not really standardized. So it took a lot of time. However, what I want to emphasize is that it's a huge advantage. Our data just had a huge advantage to be representative, and then relatively less data bias. And then we did our best to make it better by using the observation weight. So another question. So far, you know, my talk title is gendered knowledge, and then I keep talking about gender, but actually when you are looking at this database webpage, there's no demographic information of myself. There's only my name. However, it doesn't really tell how old I am or what kind of like gender I have, or what is my ethnicity or race. It does not give like any socio-demographic information, which sociologists really love. And it's a bummer that actually we couldn't get any of these variables from this data set. So what we did is to predict gender from the first name, and then that becomes pretty popular since the big data research has become like widely used, because usually they do not have this kind of information. So people, however, still want to socio-demographic information. So they begin to use the first name of an author as a way to measure the gender. But of course, there are, as you can imagine, endless problems with it. However, one advantage of it is that we are doing research in American universities in North America, 1980 to 2010, and they have a pretty strict norm of giving a first name based on gender. So, you know, like Rebecca, Olivia, and Jennifer, and no man will have those kind of names. However, like Michael, Ryan, or why am I running out of examples? So Jeffrey, who is my boy's name, those kind of names will never be given to girls. Hi, good to see you. Yeah, I know. Anyway, so the thing we try to do is to use this first name and then try to match the gender as much as we can do. So what we did is based on one of our co-authors' work, Bas Hofstra, and then he published paper in 2017, which was actually directly about how to predict the gender based on the first name. So first, what we did is we started from the data where we knew names and gender, and then we have some data from Stanford that lists the name of gender and first name of the Stanford members, and then we match it to U.S. Social Security Administration data from 1900 to 2017, and it gave some. For example, there is a very strict gender norm, as I told you. 99.7% of all people named Jessica are women, and then 99.6% of all people named Jeffrey are men. And then what we can learn from here is that if we know that someone is Jessica or someone is Jeffrey, we are pretty confident that that person's gender would be either woman or a man. So by combining those two kinds of data set, we find the threshold, which threshold of gender background in the Social Security Administration data relate best to true gender of the data. We have one, so it's kind of a machine learning technique. So we find a pattern and then we try to estimate the threshold that's going to give us the best result, and then use the same thresholds to classify gender in the ProQuest data. And then also, in addition to that, we still have some missing data. So we also used our package, which is called gender, and double check our approach and try to make sure that we have the high confidence of the gender prediction from the name. And then about 86% names are matched. I think I didn't update this number. It was slightly better at the end. It was like 93% or something. However, it's pretty constant that 42% are women and about 58% are men. And then we missed the 14% of international students, just like me, whose name is Lanu, and then they will have no idea I'm a female or a male. So actually we ended up removing these international students from the data. And then I'm going to explain why actually that was not a too bad a decision to study this problem. So based on our gender prediction, it's what we got. So from 1980 to 2010, the proportion of PhD graduates are becoming more equal. It's amazingly becoming equal. So female proportion has been up, constantly up, and the male proportion has been constantly down, and it's almost coming close to meet in the middle. So it was like 2010. So I think in 2022, it has become almost mid or reversed, I believe. Here, so far I talked like 25 minutes and I haven't really talked about how to measure the gendered knowledge. So I think it's time to go back to think about now what I really mean by saying gendered knowledge. So how can we define gendered knowledge? I told you like which kind of paper would be like a woman type and which kind of paper would be a man type, and what does that mean? I didn't really give you the detail what that means. So how can you define it, and how do we know which research is associated with women and which research is associated with men? So what we tried is trying two different kinds of approaches. The first approach is very simple. So we just decide that research that references gender and sex is actually like, research that references more women and more females. We decided that we consider that as a more woman type research. And then it's actually a very common notion. So I don't know whether you guys have seen this book before, but this is really a fun book. It's called The Invisible Woman, and it came out in 2019. And what the book is about is that the default set is mostly set for men, and then there are so many things. Default is men, and just the women's data are omitted, and then it's not really reflected in the data product. And then it's happening in urban planning, it's happening in the size of an iPhone, it's happening in piano key sizes, it's happening basically everywhere. So what I want to say is that the science has been so much stalled because they are missing this women's data from the science. So just filling in this women's research has been a really important contribution for scientific knowledge. And then there's the tendency that when first author is women, when the first author is a woman, or the last author is a woman, or the full group is a woman, it's much more likely that that the journal paper includes gender and sex analysis. So when women are included in as a researcher or in the collaborating team, they are much more likely to include this. What is this? Gender and sex analysis. So that can be one way of defining what we mean by saying gendered research. So we hypothesize that research that's about women, research that talks about women, that research that's about women is because it's filling the gap in the data bias, historical data bias. We actually thought that it's going to have a positive impact on the career. And then that's actually against the explanation that I gave you in the beginning. But actually, when we think through how we can define the gender type of research, we find that actually, based on the previous literature, when they include more women in their research, when they talk more about women and they include women subjects in their clinical trials, it has the scientific value, so it must have the good impact on the PhD's future career. So we measured the first way of gendered knowledge by using gender referents. So if a dissertation includes more female, more woman, it's more likely to be more like woman type research. And if it's referring to more males and more men, we consider that as more men type research. So that's one way of doing it. And the second way of doing it is what I have been talking about, like research that's associated with gender. So if you still have a belief that research might not be associated with gender, and we do not have any gender impression of the gender, so I prepared a little practice about it. So here is an abstract. Here is an exemplary abstract that I got from my real data set. So let's read it together. So it says, depression disproportionately impacts low-income women. So many of these women are mothers whose depression negatively affects their parenting quality and the well-being of their children. This paper estimates the effect of maternal depression on parenting quality and child outcomes, and examines the ability of early Head Start participation to reduce the negative impact of maternal depression on parenting and child outcomes. This sounds like a very important research, but aside from that, what do you think? So how many of you think this abstract is woman associated? Or how many of you think this abstract is man associated? Given that most of you guys are turning off camera and it's difficult for me to check how many of you guys think about it. But I'm pretty sure many of you guys think it reminds some women, right? It's somewhat associated with women. It's like, yeah, and then kindly, yeah, there is one person who participated again, yes, we do think it's like women-associated research. And then it's actually, indeed, it's a sociology dissertation abstract. And let's take a look at another example. A numerical reservoir simulator that uses affinivarium spatial discretization and two-time. I even having a problem reading it. Discretization schemes is developed and tested. First and second order derivatives for the numerical simulator are derived using an adjoint-based approach. What kind of gender do you have in mind? What kind of PhDs do you have in mind who is writing this dissertation? Probably men, right? And then it's actually an abstract from mechanical engineering dissertation. So you might think it's the difference from STEM and non-STEM, right? However, let's take a look at another example. This is another sociology dissertation abstract, and then let's take a look. The study contributes an empirically validated theory for how variations in labor mobility and social structure relate to regional economic competitiveness. I first identify and explore variations in the structural properties of a social system that enable and constrain individual action with respect to labor mobility. It's not about gender at all, but we can also have another gender impression from this abstract. How about this one? Let's take another example. It's another abstract from mechanical engineering dissertation. And let's take a look. So the student-centered active learning in undergraduate program approach to instructional design was adapted with the goal of delivering more effective statistics, dynamics, and multivariate calculus instruction and integrated course curricula. Inquiry-based learning exercises were designed incorporating material. It's the same abstract from mechanical engineering, but it has a different gender connotation. And then I think everyone is feeling it, but I'm not gonna say it outright. Give me a sec. I have a problem with my computer, so let me share again. Yeah. So, and then based on this kind of impression we have from this abstract, and then my hypothesis with it is that research that's like women's work would have the opposite impact for one's career because of the reason that I explained to you before, because women's work is more likely to be devalued in comparison to male's work. So we hypothesize that if they write the dissertation that's like women's work, they are gonna have more hard time at the job market. It does not mean their research is good or bad. It is just about they are going to have the hard time at the job market or not. So I hypothesized two things, and then now we need to measure it. And then actually what researchers usually do to measure the gendered impression of consumer product, just like the examples I gave you in the beginning, there is actually a line of research that's related to gendered product. And then they usually say that beer is more man typed product, and like cupcake is more women typed product, and bacon is a man typed product, and something else. Anyway, so there's the gendered impression of consumer product, and how they decide how much which product is how much gendered is based on asking people like, how much do you think this bacon is associated with men or women? And AKA, we know that it's a survey. So usually they use the survey to do that. We cannot do it for this research literature. You know, we have been just looking at 4 different kinds of abstracts, and we are already tired. And then it distribute like 1 million abstracts to people, and then let them score it, whether it sounds like women or men. It's too inhumane, and it's just too cruel. So we decided not to do it. It's the abuse of human rights. So however, we found that there might be some terms that sound like that associate the gender inside of it. And then actually, when you just read it through, we already processed that information somewhat unconsciously. And then I believe those terms were like women, mothers, parenting, children, participation, maternal. I think those kind of terms somewhat arouse you the sense of gender connotation. How about another sociology abstract we read together, like theory, labor mobility, social structure, economic system? I think this kind of terms might be the reason why we think it's like written by men. So, and then we decided to focus on those gender associated terms, but how can we know which one is more like woman associated term and which one is more associated with men? One researcher can just sit down and look through the dictionary of terms and just decide how much is woman and how much is man. That's gonna be criticized the reviewer like from the beginning. So what we did is to recreate the woman corpus and man corpus, and then we do it like every year. And then from the woman corpus, we we score the terms. How much is more likely to be used in woman corpus in comparison to man corpus? And then those terms that actually come standing out to be particularly more used by women include student, teacher, participation, school, family, age, health, parent, child, mother, nurse, grade, year, express. And then you can see that some of terms are pretty from the education field, and some of them are from public health, and then many of them include like the relationship, examination, interview, like more qualitative approach. So it's the mix of many things. And how about those masculinized terms? It includes, like it says, the system, technique, like simulation, computer, because all the terms are stemmed, which means we actually cut out the last part of the term, which is a common process for the natural language processing techniques. So those terms look not normal. So please understand that part. So they are likely to be more engineering-based or computer science-based words. And then that's what it is. And then what we did is that because we measure based on a term level, we need to change it to an abstract level. So what we did is just to count how many women associated terms it has, how many male associated terms it has, and then we make an average per abstract to get the abstract level gendered connotation of a dissertation. So I think as you see from this statistic, we combine all the fields, and then that actually brings out this kind of result, which means mechanical engineering. So I should explain it first. So in this figure, x-axis is that how much a dissertation is gender associated, and each line includes 95% of the all dissertations. And the point you are looking at is a median. And then y-axis is the field, which means each line represents each field. So if you look at this, and then I ordered it based on the median. So when you compare the gap between these points in the middle, it shows you between field variation. And then when you look at the width of a line, it shows the within field variation. And then, mechanical engineering dissertations are absolutely very related to male. And then sociology, public health, and the women's study, they are much more likely to be in they are adopting more feminized terms. And then one interesting thing is you can see that there are definitely between field variation, which means STEM fields are much more likely to be like male typed, and non-STEM fields are less likely to be male typed, which we all know. But even inside of a field, there's a pretty big variation of it. And then that variation is particularly wider in non-STEM fields or humanities and social science fields. However, there is actually all the variation inside of around this median. So there is within field variation as well as there's the field variation, which somewhat naturally brings us to apply the model based on multi-level, or you sometimes you call it hierarchical linear model, whatever, like mixed model, or yeah, there are multiple terms to call it. So we use the multi-level model, and then we have two levels. One is a discipline level or a field level, and then on individual level. And then dependent variable is it should be a variable to measure the success in career, and then we define it as the survival in academia, and then we measure it by becoming a dissertation advisor or not, which means if we can see Lanu Kim again as an advisor from our ProQuest data, we see that as that I have been surviving in academia for like 20 years, and then I could make one PhD student, and then we consider that as that I succeed in academia. So of course that's not a true story, but I'm just telling you that that's how we measure it. And then, and there can be a lot of pros and cons, and then I'll explain more about it. And then key independent variable is how much your dissertation is gender referenced and gender associated, which I explained to you a lot in the beginning. And then we also include a lot of control variables, like there is the period effect, and then institutional ranking, race and ethnicity, which is also based on the name. In this case, it's the last name, not the first name. And then also the previous publication record as just a way to get somewhat the merit of a PhD candidate, and then advisor's influence, which is also measured by the publication record of advisor. Here. And then also we did another robust, no, it's not this one. So when we look at the descriptive statistics of our dependent variable, which is the survival in academia, you can see that males are much more likely to survive in academia, and then female are less. However, it's all decreasing as it's getting close to 2010, which is obvious because those people who are graduated from 2005 have less chance to raise a PhD student. So it's obvious that it should be decreasing. So it's essential to conclude the period effect in the model because it's time dependent. Finally, all in all, based on all this process, this is kind of the main figure that we drew from this research. So it's showing the standardized coefficient, which means we can compare the size of the coefficient, and that's the x-axis. And then y-axis shows you which variable we are measuring. And then we can see we have two levels. One is an individual, another one is the field or discipline level. And then first of all, the main finding we have is that women are less likely to survive in academia, which confirm the first hypothesis. And also, it's not the first hypothesis, it's like the systematic, like underrepresentation of women in academia in general. And then for the first hypothesis, we hypothesized that those dissertations that are about women are much more likely to succeed, which means they are going to have the good impact on one's career. However, if it's associated with women, they are likely to have the less, they're not going to have the positive impact on one's career. And it's all standardized in the individual level. So in other words, if you are in the sociology department, and then if you are writing relatively more women type of research than your other sociology peers, you are less likely to have a job in your future. So that's what we found from the analysis. And then in the field level, we cannot find any significant effect for gender reference to abstract, but for gender associated, we found a negative impact, which means that those fields that are more associated with women, like public health or women's studies or sociology, they are less likely to get a job. The job market is getting worse for those fields, particularly associated with women. So that's what we found. I also did a robust check, but because we are running out of time, let me just skip it. And then let me just show you another result that it's the interaction of the field level and the individual level. And then what I showed you is that particularly in those women-associated fields, this evaluation of feminized research is much more severe. So the penalty for writing associated women is more negative in those fields that are more associated with women, which is somewhat the irony, and it's somewhat the sad result, but there is like that interaction effect. Anyway, we also have another part that's talking about non-STEM and natural science and technology, engineering, math field, and then HSS, which is humanities and social sciences. But actually, again, I'm running out of time, so I'm going to skip that part, and then let me just move to summary. So gender shapes the kinds of research practices. So we can see the gender, depending on gender, what kind of research they do is definitely different. And then we found that feminized research is in general devalued, while masculinized research is rewarded in Korea. And doing masculinized research in non-masculinized fields is more rewarded, which is, I told you, the irony. And HSS fields prefer general masculine research more than STEM fields, which I didn't explain in detail due to the time limit. But anyway, good news is that studying women in research is valued, which is the obvious drive to fix the explicit gender bias that exists in academic knowledge has been rewarded in academic career. And then I consider that that is a very good news. So I would conclude that gender inequality in knowledge is rather implicit in symbolic text rather than explicit subject matter. So explicitly whether they talk about gender or not. So what's the mechanism? So why is masculinized research is particularly more valued? Why does that happen? What kind of behaviors people do actually make that phenomenon? And then there can be multiple reasons, there can be multiple theories, and we couldn't examine all of them, but our just assumption is that there might be the matching problem between job applicants and evaluators. So more women bring in more like women perspective research, and then actually those evaluators who are more likely to be men because of the historical representation of gender in the professorate, they might just think those topics are less important because they don't talk about it. So that there can be a matching problem. And another possible theory is that more specialization of men. So men are more likely to specialize in their research, and that could be the reason why their research is more valued, but we couldn't really examine it in this paper. And I always include the limitation slide at the end of the talk. And then, of course, I don't have time to talk about it because it's not important. No, I am just joking. Yeah, anyway, so let's just skip it because we're running out of time. And thank you so much for listening. And then please feel free to give me any opinions and any questions if you have.
Well, thank you so much, Lanu. This is a fascinating research. I think that it's a lot of work, even just to clean the data and put the data together. This is really difficult, and you have done so well. So, well, congratulations with your really good work. So now I would like to ask whether there are people who want to ask questions. We can start with like using the microphone. Like if you want to ask question directly, I would like to invite you to turn on your microphone, and then you can just talk freely, or you can raise your hand. And then in the meantime, if I see that there's a related question in the chat box, I will also help the person to ask the question. Okay, so does it make sense? Okay, so let's, questions from the floor. Are there hands? Anyone?
Hi, Lake.
Hi. Oh, Peja has a question.
Yeah, thanks very much for the very interesting presentation. And there are also some like rather surprising finding. I have two questions. The first one is about the measurement. I didn't quite get that how you identify gender associated term, how you classify certain terms as masculine or feminized, especially like I think if my memory is correct, program is feminized, but participation is masculinized. That's kind of like not very kind of counterintuitive to me. So I like to hear a bit more about that. And the second question is kind of related, because when you discuss gender associated term, we are actually look at gender as a process of signification, right? And scholar like Joan Scott talk about when we use gender terms, sometimes we are not really talk about man or woman. We are actually use gender to signify what is more important, or as a means of evaluation. Like we say, oh, you look like woman, you're like woman, and that's actually a criticizing term. It's not really describing that person as a woman. Okay, so go back to your research. So I'm just wondering, is it possible? So gender is a cause, or is actually a consequence when you look at the process of signification? And I think that's quite relevant to your argument. So I just want to hear a bit more about that. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you so much for a wonderful question. First of all, let me answer the more like clear one to answer. So, I somewhat briefly mentioned how I define which one is more woman associated and which one is more man associated. So, yeah, and it's a little bit complicated. Maybe I think I should have prepared the formula of it, but basically to just tell you the essence of it, it's like the log odds. So first of all, I just compute how many times women or children have been used in woman corpus, which means the corpus is the set of abstracts, it's the combined abstracts, and then that are written by women. So, and then there are two corpus per year from 1980 to 2010. So there are always the set of terms that are more populated among women and that are more populated among men. And then by using the formula that's similar to the log odds ratio, and then what I calculated is that when they talk about like a term education, and then how much more likely it's gonna come up in the female corpus in comparison to the male corpus. So it's basically what I calculated, and then we are very proud of doing it every year, because people are changing how they use terms, and then women are entering definitely entering into academia, as I showed you in the beginning, it's very close to the gender parity these days in the higher education. So things are changing in multiple ways. So by just measuring how much which term is associated with men and women, we could follow up the temporal change, but at the same time, we could show that which term is more likely to be used by women and or used by men in a given year. So I wish I made it clear. And the second question is really interesting. So whether it's a cause or whether it's a consequence. I don't know. I really I really wish I could know. And then, however, it's a cause or consequence. I think if it's a consequence, so like if women write more about their their experiences, write things that are more important to themselves, and then if those kind of topics are somewhat rejected from the job market constantly, and then I think it can be the consequence of it instead of the cause of it. However, one of the papers, one of the idea that I heavily cited and that somewhat drove this paper from the beginning to the end was the work of Code that was written in 1991 and 1993. And then she was a feminist and working in this science and STS field. And then what she said is that like women and men basically have different research interests, and then they just talk about they have different perspectives. Like women are more likely to talk about AKA private areas, and then men are more likely to talk about AKA public area. And then these things that are about private areas are more likely to be devalued because they are discussed by women. And then in that sense, I think it's the cause of it. So I think both make sense, but just personally and by just instinctively, more like based on my just like upright answer would be it's more like a cause rather than the consequence, but I don't have the scientific evidence to support it. But thank you so much for a nice food of thought. I think I will think about it for a while. Yeah.
Thank you. Hi, I will answer questions following Peija. Hi, Professor Kim. I enjoy your presentation very much. And thank you for this wonderful discussion. It's a very important issue. I think Londa Schubinger's work has feminism changed science has been published in Taiwan. So we have been discussing her work, but you have a different operationalization of how we perceive the scientific research. So I have two questions. One is kind of following up Peija's questions. I wonder some key term in gender studies, such as men, could be categorized in your study. So for example, on this slide, we can see women, children, even gender are categorized as feminized terms. How about men? I think this is kind of important because in women's study and gender studies, we try to highlight men as part of the gender research. So this is my curiosity. And I think that also reflects how this kind of operationalization of the key concept may reflect your ideas about gender. And my second question is about the slide that you didn't have time to present about the differences between natural science, engineering, and medicine, and the humanities and social science. So I would like to take this opportunity to have you spend some time tell us about the findings. Thank you.
Yeah, Thank you for pointing me there. Of course, I'd love to talk about it. Every single model here took like a week or a month to run, so I'd love to share just one more result. First of all, Londa Schibinger was a great mentor of this project as well. So she actually mentored us from the beginning of this project, and then we actually wrote a paper with her as well in PLOS ONE, recently published it, which highlights that how women historians make a new era in the field of history by just putting in the new agenda, by setting up the new agenda to investigate. So I just wanna say she was a wonderful person, but she was really picky. So actually, after this paper is published, she emailed me and then actually asked me to fix the reference, which I was wrongly put. So anyway, it was great, but she is a really thorough researcher. Anyway, the first question is really interesting. Actually, we were curious about it too. So as you just said, women is a somewhat feminized term, children is a feminized term, and then female is also a pretty feminized term. And interesting part is actually it's less feminized than women, which means like when we mention about men and women, it's more about gender and it's more like said by women scholars. However, female and male, it's more like about related to sex, and then which is more likely to be mentioned by STEM fields, and then maybe that's the reason why it's less gendered. But anyway, for the men, we were very curious, so we were actually searching what kind of abstracts were using the men exactly, and then we found that actually it's pretty commonly still used as a gender neutral term in multiple cases, like when it's like a religion study, when it's about the philosophy, people still use men as a kind of thing that refers to human being. And then, that's a very common default gender bias. However, it's some people argue it's just a grammar. And then it's actually, it's impossible to, there are more and more feminism works are coming out, but the number of them is not enough to balance the gender neutral term use of men in the history. So I think so far, based on our data, which stopped at 2010, we couldn't find that men is actually a gendered term, but I think it might be different as time goes forward. So that's one idea. And
What about, Lanu, sorry to interrupt, what about masculinity?
Masculinity.
Because in a lot of studies, like gender studies, we talk about masculinity. So is it, well, sorry, Charlie, but you can answer the second question after. Because, is it women type research if it is, if it is masculinity? It doesn't
That's a
sound
good
like
question. Yeah, I think masculinity is definitely a more like a women type term, but the thing, I need to take a look at the exact number from the data. But for this graph, we are somewhat just pointing out those terms that are largely used and also gendered. And I think masculinity is somewhat couldn't meet my expectation of like how many times it has been used. So I might have dropped it from this figure, but I agree that it must be different from the use of men. Yeah. And the second question about the STEM and non-STEM. So yeah, STEM and non-STEM. So we had a belief that whether like the STEM people always argue that they are gender neutral and they don't care about gender, and then humanities, social sciences scholars argue that we are somewhat the cradle of the third wave of feminist movement. We are the place where feminism started. We are very like friendly to women. So they have different like standpoint about it, and then this is our result, that we differentiate non-STEM and humanities and social science fields. And then you can see that still in STEM field, like systematic what should I say, penalty for being a woman is higher. So women are less likely to be hired because she is a woman. She is a woman in STEM fields, and then that's statistically significant than humanities and social science fields. However, in gender reference and gender associated in an individual level, amazingly, there was no difference actually between those two fields. But that one stood out is that in the field level. So basically, what it means is that in STEM fields, all fields have a good job market perspective, and then all disciplines have a good job market perspective. So they don't need to there are no particular like fields that are because it's more gendered, they are not disadvantaged at the market. So this way, I think it's going to be easier to understand. So in the STEM field, the field that's really gendered is, it's really feminized is like a bio field. So bio fields are much more populated with women, and what they do in research is much more women related. Like when you look at this example, there is a cell, which is much used in the biology field. So, and also the one that's most highly masculinized is like a mechanical engineering, and it means that in the job market, it doesn't matter whether you are a PhD in mechanical engineering or in biology. It does not really affect your job market prospect. But in humanities and social science fields, it matters. If you are in economics, if you are in public policy, if you are in what else? What are the examples? Yeah, business field or in political science, you guys have higher chance to succeed in the job market. However, if you are in sociology, if you are in women's study, if you are in anthropology, it's less like they are less likely to get a job. So that's what we found from the field level. And then I believe it's because, like, it maybe because I feel it more because I'm in the science specialized university. There is a very like the difference between how they conceive about themselves, and then humanities and social sciences are definitely the fields who are more struggling with where to send their graduate students after they got their degree. And then however, so I think when they're struggling with resources, these resources are much more like distributed to more like men-like disciplines, like business and economics first, and coming down in a later. However, in STEM fields, where still the job market prospect is relatively better than humanities and social sciences, I think the difference doesn't really stand out. Oh, thank you so much for giving me a chance to talk about it. I'm really happy. Thank you.
Questions? Any questions, say, from students? Don't be shy.
I'm very used to this silence. I can wait.
Okay, great.
Yeah. By the way, isn't it the lunchtime? Did you get lunch?
Well, it's the lunch is usually at 12:30. So yeah, I guess I think some of them are eating lunch right now while listening to you. Usually we have a lunch box with us.
Cool.
Yeah, and some people will eat at the back, while others eat.
I know. I do it all the time.
Yeah. Questions? So maybe I can ask a question. Probably you, but yeah, you have answered the question about masculinity. Let's see how. Yeah, you didn't mention about, just now you mentioned about international students, right? And that you remove the international students from the group. And then you said you can explain why you think that it is a good thing to do. after doing the project. Can you tell us a little bit more about?
Sure.
Yeah.
I was really torn about it because, as you see, yeah, I'm obviously an international student, and if they just remove me because I'm an international student, I would be very sad. So, however, it was somewhat the unavoidable decision for multiple reasons, and then the main reason is that where is it? Give me just 1 second. Yeah, it's because how we measure the career. So actually, it was really challenging to measure a career of a PhD student because there's no follow-up study like where they are. These days, we create ORCID ID, which somewhat is the collective database where we update our careers and what we become. However, I don't update it often, so it's not really the accurate information. But anyway, it's really difficult. And then another problem of analyzing the academic job market is that, the proportion of people who become a professor is really a rare event. And then it sometimes takes a long time. And then those job market is somewhat widely spread to around the world. So it's really difficult to trace all of those graduates and find where they are and whether they become a tenure track faculty or not. So there are also multiple reasons why it's really difficult to study. However, because again, I told you, there's a saying in Korea that actually the professorship is given by the God's will. So it's very like depending on the luck, and then there's a lot of luck thing actually coming in when you become a professor, because it's the timing. Of course, there are multiple reasons, but anyway, it's a rare event, difficult to observe. And so people sometimes say like the hiring event is happening such a too rare. When we look at just one case or two cases, it's very difficult to find a pattern. So we could need to look at in the longitude perspective and then analyze it, but it's difficult to get the data. And there are multiple reasons behind it. However, so what we decided to do is to measure whether they survive in academia or not, and whether they become a dissertation advisor or not. But the problem you can expect is that it's again from the ProQuest database, which means it's mostly centered in North American universities and the US and Canada. And then those international students are more likely to come back to their own country. So actually their successful careers are not well represented in our method. So we just decided that we are somewhat focusing on those students with somewhat like, I know if I am trying to say it out loud, the wording is not so good, but maybe like those Western country-based students from, by just analyzing them, I think, we are trying to get some legitimacy in our data of using this dependent variable, which is again only focusing on those Western career only. So that was somewhat our limitation. Yeah.
Yeah. Questions? Let's see whether there are questions from the floor. Okay. Hey, there's one question. Zhang Ting Shi. Okay. Your mic. Unmuted. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you, Dr. Kim. I have a quick question for you. I'm curious about, because you categorize the into masculinized and the feminized term. So how did you categorize like the issue related to gay, lesbian, and transgender? Yeah. So because what I only saw is that we didn't saw the term related to this issue, and I think it's important for gender studies. So just for my curious things.
Yeah, thanks for asking. That's another great question. I didn't really intend it, but I think, yeah, because I somewhat populated these examples somewhat based on statistics, so it shouldn't be really, yeah, I don't know why it doesn't include any. However, that's a great question. And then I believe just like what Lake asked earlier about masculinity, there are multiple terms that I didn't really show you as an example, but that are gendered. And then obviously those issues with transgenders and then non-binary gender would be, I think, included in these feminized terms. As you can see, the gender itself is a very like the feminized term. So I have a strong belief that they must be more studied by women and then thereby more like considered as women terms. But yeah, I'm curious where gay or lesbian is. I'll take a look. Yeah, if I find any, I'll let you know.
Thanks for your question. Other people? You know, your study reminds me of, you remember Becky Pettit?
Yeah.
She was the editor for Social Problems. And then she mentioned something in the social research methods class saying that it's very obvious from the writing that whether the person is written by a man versus a woman. And then, and that she believes affect the results of the reviewers' comments. You know, but yeah, she mentioned this in the class. But I mean, I just wonder, what if a man writes like a woman? So in your study, if the man writes like a woman, what will be the implication?
That's actually a very good question. And then, you know what? I prepared a slide for it. So,
Really?
I guess I just have 5 more minutes, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm sharing my screen. So it's in our appendix, research policy or journal, which is wonderful, but they have a strict word limit, so I couldn't really include everything that we wanted. However, we definitely tested it. That was actually one of our main hypotheses to test when we follow our stereotype, what's going to happen and what's going to happen when you do not follow the stereotype.
Right.
And then for definitely this like in humanities and social science fields, when males, which is the white bar, act more like women, they are more sanctioned. They are more sanctioned for doing that. However, if they follow those like male typed research tradition, they are gonna have a boost. So it actually, however, this effect is relatively smaller for women. However, it was actually stronger for men for whether following the gender tradition is how much following the gender tradition will have an impact on their career. So that was interesting. However, it was the opposite in STEM fields. So if women follow the men tradition, they have a boost. However, if they are somewhat acting in an opposite way, they are somewhat more sanctioned. So we are trying to interpret it, but it was too complicated. And then if we just write it out for too long, the editor didn't like it. So I prepared it as a surprise. But I'm so happy that you asked it.
Yeah, it is related to gender performance, right? Because
Yeah.
I do think that there is theoretical implications from what, from the results here. It's a pity that you put it in the appendix, But yeah. All right. Any other questions? We have 5 minutes left. I want to wait for another student maybe to ask a question. Well, there is none. Maybe I took the liberty to ask another question. So I'm wondering, whether before you explore ProQuest, have you and also the matching of the advisor's name. I really think that it's very creative, honestly, to see whether the same name appear, in an others, in a student's, advisor list. But I also wondered before thinking of using that ProQuest, have you tried other ways to test your hypothesis, like maybe LinkedIn or other tools? And I'm not sure about the data science field, because I don't know what kind of big data is publicly accessible and which are not. So is LinkedIn, OCID, or they sound like publicly accessible to me. Is that true, or you think that ProQuest is the best way to test your question? So yeah, have you explored alternatives?
Yeah. Sorry, I've seen one chat from here as well. But let me just answer your question quickly first. Yeah, and then I feel like I gave you the list of questions I want to get, the questions I want to get from the talk, because that's actually the one I really want to answer as well. First of all, for like the LinkedIn or the ORCID, those are relatively new. So we are already taking it like as granted, but they are very relatively new. And then the problem is that I told you this, like getting a professorship is relatively a rare event. So if you want to like follow up, and then it takes a long time, just to finish the PhD and then to be a professor, it takes like forever. So it was not really good for the longitudinal research. So, and then because they're relatively, however, like in 10 years, I think they're gonna be much better than the thing we are doing here. So what we did alternatively is to link the data to the Web of Science, which is the set of SCI, SSCI, ANHCI journals. They are super expensive, and that's one of the reasons why big data sucks. They actually asked me like $10 million to buy the whole data set.
Oh my God.
Another amazing thing is that my postdoc advisor bought it. Of course, he didn't buy it by himself, but it's like collectively bought by Stanford University. So all university faculty have access to it. But it's again important to remember that big data is expensive and inaccessible. And I heard that LinkedIn data can be only accessed if you research with LinkedIn researchers. So that was what I heard. Anyway, so what we did is that based on Web of Science data, we linked those people as much as possible, as close as possible. And then what we did again is that whether PhDs author at least one academic publication 10 years since graduation, which is another way of measuring like academic continuity after graduated from PhD. And it's likely they are going to be in academia if they keep publishing. And of course, they can be in the research center, or if there just can be professors who stop publishing, we know a lot of cases. So there are multiple reasons it's going to happen, but that's another possible proxy. And then we thought that if we have some consistency between those two different measures, we believe that the results will be robust. And fortunately, they are more or less, pretty similar. So we took it as a strong evidence. And then to answer the question in the chat, this question is Jia Rong asked, could you please explain more about what HSS field prefer masculinized research more than non-STEM, natural science, technology, engineering, math fields? That I think it's coming from one of my conclusion. And by the way, thanks for the question. What I meant is the results from here. So when we divide the section for STEM fields and HSS fields, and then we found that those fields that are more associated with men have a higher possibility, they have the better job market than those in the female associated fields. However, that effect was only significant in HSS and not in STEM field. So that was actually the reason why I said HSS fields prefer masculinized research. And the reason, I don't know. I don't have the evidence to talk about it, but in my brain, I think I briefly explained it before. I think it's because there are less resources available for HSS, and when they have less resources at the job market, it seems like it's somewhat, first they prioritize those man-related fields over woman-related fields, and that's my like hypothesis that's not examined, but I would say it's kind of a mechanism that I have in my mind.
Yeah, that's possible.
Yeah.
All right.
You're
Well,
welcome.
thank you so much for all your really good question, and thanks, Lanu, for spending time to share your research with us, and it's really an incredible job. So, well, thanks again. I'll see you on Facebook again, Lanu, in a minute.
Yeah, thank you so much for nice opportunity, and it was great to talk to you in this manner. So thanks for inviting me.
Oh, if someone wants to stay behind and talk, you just put up your hands. If not, I'll wait for 10 seconds. Okay, if you want to stay online and then talk to Lanu personally, feel free to talk to do that. Say some people are working on big data things, and then some of you want some mentorship or some advice from her. I think it's fine too. So I'll just check whether there are people putting up their hands. If not, we'll leave. Well, thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you for listening.
Yeah. Well, just let's wait for a little bit.
Yeah.
Looks
You
like,
know, I'm doing summer institute in this